Are you folks seeing the welcome screen now?
Yes, I see it.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So welcome again. I hope that you guys enjoyed the breakout room experience. I felt like I could have hung out in there a little longer, but luckily we have some more time at the end after Graham's presentation where we'll be able to go back in there. So if anyone didn't get a chance to share about remote work experiences, or if anyone had a question, Terry had a good question about API docs, and I probably have a few resources and stuff that I can post into the channel, Terry, for getting started with API docs. But yeah, we can go back into the rooms after and continue to ask questions and to round off the night. But I think let's move ahead as scheduled to Graham's talk. For those of you that are new to our meetings, welcome. And if you've never heard of Write the Docs before, I just thought I would mention Write the Docs is actually a global community. So there are conferences. So they started in Portland, and now there's several conferences in the US. And there's a European conference in Prague. There's also a conference in Australia. And there's meetup groups like this one all over the world. There's one in China. There's several in Canada. There's one based out of Toronto. And it's neat because it's really comprised of folks that care about documentation, but not, and technical communication, but not specifically technical writers. It came out of the Python community. So it came a little bit more out of the developer, from the developer space, and developers that were passionate about writing good documentation. So those of you who know a little bit about Python might know that they have Sphinx for generating docs, which is a pretty neat tool that uses restructured text. And it's been something that's been on my bucket list to work with one day. I've been working with Markdown for a while, but I've never tried authoring in restructured text. So yeah, Write the Docs is, it's programmers, it's tech writers, it's people in marketing, content strategy, and anyone who wants people to have a great experience with software. So I love that. It's very inclusive. That's one aspect of Write the Docs that is also kind of important to underscore. I think it's a very, very inclusive community. If you ever go to any of the conferences, Eric Holscher, who is the founder of Write the Docs, he came up with this concept called the Pac-Man rule. So it's basically the idea of being in a conference environment and, you're on your own and you see kind of these circles of people that are all, kind of talking and seemingly all know each other and that sort of thing. And the Pac-Manning is that you sort of make a little bit of space, so that you create a little bit of space for people so they can join in. And that's very much the tone of Write the Docs all the way down. Yeah, so I think a lot of you have been coming to these when we met back in the days when we met in person, and I'm sure we'll get back there again sometime soon. So we met in person, and we had beverages and refreshments, and we even started going to a bar afterwards, some of us. And now we're doing it online. So different venue. We've moved to the online venue, but same kind of community experience. Alrighty, we've kind of gone over all of the housekeeping stuff, I think, already. But yeah, if anyone's having a difficult time tonight, I think we're really, myself and the other Write the Docs volunteers, we really want everyone to have a great experience tonight. So if there's something that's not working for you, don't be shy to speak up. And yeah, it is our first time doing this, so we're taking notes, and hopefully we'll work out any kinks tonight. And yeah, we already had moderators for the group, so that's great. All right, so without any further ado, we'll get into Graham's talk. my speaker notes went away. Where did you go, speaker notes? I'm gonna need those if I'm gonna talk here. Okay, I got them. Yeah, so I'm really happy to have Graham on board for tonight. I've been having the pleasure of working with Graham for a while at Shopify. He's a technical content strategist who oversees the developer docs at Shopify. And my team is, the team that I'm a part of is the partner-facing docs team. So we're the team of technical writers that writes a lot of the content. And it's been really nice to have a dedicated person in the technical content strategy role that we can work with to help us with questions around information architecture and organizing information and how information kind of interrelates and interconnects across all of our developer-facing properties. So that's really kind of like been my introduction to content strategy and working with a content strategist, and so it's been really great experience for me. So Graham he's an ex-journalist. He was previously with Maclean's and with Money Sense, and I recommend checking out his blog post about the Shopify developer documentation and his project. And his other posts on Medium as well are also worth checking out. So without further ado, I guess we'll try to get Graham's presentation up, and I'll turn things over to Graham.
Thanks, Andrew. Okay, so I think like many of us, I'm learning what's going on with video chat presentations at the moment. So I've got, among other things, I've got a seasonal affective disorder lamp here to light me, because I've looked at a lot of like dimly lit video chats this week. I was like, it's not going to be me this time. I also wanted to check just to make sure that people are able to ask questions throughout the thing, because I'm going to present, but I know it's kind of hard in this context to get people's attention. So I know that Zoom has like a raise hand function. If you click on the participants thing in the lower right, there's kind of a thing that allows you to flag to the speaker that you have a question. Would someone mind hitting that just so we all see what happens? Because I don't know if this is going to work.
I just did.
Did anything happen?
It just says lower hand.
Yes.
You can see my hand.
So yes, I can see. So in the list of participants, people's little hand emoticon shows up. So maybe if Andrew, if I could get you to like keep watch over that and like just flag me if people have any questions, because I'm going to be looking at the presentation instead of at Zoom. And then lastly, my apologies if the connection goes down, because my internet is being flaky. I've cut out a couple times already. So if that happens, I'll be right back, and just let me know where we need to keep going. All right, I'm going to share my screen. Also, it's a pleasure to be here. Nice to meet you all. Okay, can everyone see my screen? It should say Shopify.dev from user research to information architecture. All good?
You're good.
Looks good.
All good.
Cool, thanks. All right, so yes, my name's Graham. I am a product content strategist. I work on a team at Shopify called Developer Tools and Education. So this is a team that largely works on two things. One is our developer docs, and the other is our kind of world of libraries for developers. So we maintain a Ruby library to interact with Shopify APIs. We maintain several JavaScript libraries for Node, things like that. So all of those are open source, and we accept community contributions as well. So it's kind of these are the two areas that we really play in. For the last year, roughly, I was working on a project to overhaul our developer documentation. And this was basically why I was hired at the company in the first place. I've been here, I'm seeing a chat thing pop up. Oh, couldn't find how to raise my hand.
I was sort of intending that to be like a back channel thing, and that one of the other organizers would maybe just chat me through that. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Okay. No, we're good. Yeah, so the project that I worked on for about the last year was overhauling Shopify's developer documentation. So we went from keeping all of our developer docs in the Shopify Help Center. And so you can see on this screenshot, it was at help.shopify.com. And we moved it about 6 weeks ago onto a brand new domain all by itself called Shopify.dev. And so I'm going to walk you through that process. I want to talk to you about the original user research that we did in order to decide on some of these things, and then the actual kind of information architecture choices that we made as a result of that research. So here's what we did as part of this process. We took all of the API and theme-related documentation out of the Help Center, help.shopify.com, and we reorganized all of that material on a new standalone site, Shopify.dev. We didn't edit most of it. It was mostly like we took one piece of content and we put it elsewhere on the new site. Here's what we did not do as part of this process. We did no quality control. We did no editing. We did no translation. We didn't build a homepage. There are other kind of like developer-facing pieces of documentation, like that related to our partner program and our affiliate programs. We didn't touch any of that. We didn't wade into the fever swamps of GitHub and try to edit READMEs or do anything like that. We did nothing related to the Shopify Partner Academy, which is like an online learning resource where you're able to actually get certified as a Shopify partner. We didn't touch any of our code examples like Shopify cheat sheet and liquid code examples. The list goes on. So there's a lot of things that we left out of this transition. So I just want to make sure that everyone kind of understands like what exactly we're talking about here. This was API and theme-related documentation, people who are building apps and people who are building themes for Shopify. So what were some of the problems that we were trying to address with this migration? The reason that we wanted to do this whole thing and the kind of thing that kicked this all off was that we were finding that it was getting harder and harder to maintain our documentation. And one of the reasons is that reference docs and tutorial kind of how-to content had become increasingly mixed together. It's putting it mildly to say that Shopify as a platform has grown very quickly over the last couple of years. And the response had been, well, we're releasing a new feature, we're releasing new functionality, we need a doc, let's make a doc. And things were increasingly just kind of piling up, and there hadn't, like I know that there had been thought put into the structure that was there, but it was getting harder to scale with the size of the platform. So basically, we were just feeling like the maintenance burden was too high, and we all know that when docs are hard to maintain, they get inaccurate, they get out of date, and so we saw that this was like long. Another that would maybe want several menus over the, and so we wanted to address as
So let's hope that
just
Graham is able to get back on.
It looks like he dropped out completely.
I can see me.
Like.
Oh,
there
look,
you are.
there you are. Okay,
I'm here. I'm back.
We lost your screen.
Oh dear. Okay, just a second.
Okay, I made a note of where you were.
Okay. Let's try this again.
I think one thing someone mentioned is we might try cutting our own video feeds, if that might improve the overall bandwidth. I'm not sure if it will, but maybe during the presentation, we can just try turning off our videos.
Okay.
Graham, we lost you right around the point where you were saying it can be difficult if it's difficult to maintain. There's a risk there. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so if that's where we left off, yeah, I think probably everyone in this group is familiar with hard to maintain means it's going to get out of date and inaccurate pretty fast. Our docs were also fairly deeply nested. So there were all kinds of concepts and tools on the platform that you would have to navigate fairly deep into a menu in order to find and like even know that they existed. And so we wanted to find a way to like bring those things up and make them visible, because this was the overriding platform or problem at the third point here, is that we found that the developer community just didn't have a great high-level sense of all of the technical capabilities that the tool is able to give them. So we wanted to find a way to make sure that people were understanding the power that they had. Finally, there was, I would say, a growing audience mismatch in the Help Center. So help.shopify.com, I mean, its primary mission is to assist Shopify merchants, people who are running stores on a day-to-day basis. And they have all kinds of needs that are very important to meet. And they have all kinds of needs that don't have great analogs in the developer world. And we were finding that some of the, that like the tool of the Help Center was not necessarily well suited to some of the needs of a developer community, for example, like reference documentation. There's kind of not much of an analog for reference documentation in merchant docs. They don't have to consult an API. It's mostly kind of instructional step-by-step content. Here's what you need to do in order to complete this task. And of course, that happens for developers too, but developers need to consult references that just don't really exist in merchant world. They also have the need for things like copy and paste code samples and being able to have interactive reference materials directly in line in the docs. And we were able to kind of hack some of those things together in the Help Center. But ultimately, when it came down to it with developer time and resources, they were always going to be more focused on the merchant facing docs because, and I absolutely think that that was the right decision, but it meant that we didn't really have kind of dedicated developer resources for developer facing materials. So that was an issue that we felt it was time to think about, okay, how can we be more focused on this community that needs these docs? Okay, so therefore, two goals that we had for the kind of external audience. One, we wanted to boost discoverability for new users, and two, we wanted to boost the speed of using our docs for our power users. And what I mean by discoverability is that if you don't already know something about Shopify, or you don't know much, we wanted to make it easier for those beginners to learn what Shopify can do for them. And one of the upshots of this was that the new site has a much flatter navigation structure. It's got a wider funnel at the top. We talk about more things higher up in the hierarchy. And of course, that cuts both ways. There's trade-offs that go along with that, but ultimately, we felt that that was the kind of direction that we wanted to go. And second, of course, was speed. We have developer docs that people are coming back to all the time. If they know the platform well and they're trying to solve specific problems, we wanted to make it faster for people to get to the resources that they use frequently. So that's things like getting them to the API references with the fewest number of clicks. And this is an area where we think that there's more work to do is search. When search and developer docs were sharing the same search utility, it was hard to kind of call out things that would have been really useful for a developer community or a developer search behavior. We just couldn't justify making the kind of deep changes to the search behavior that we think would actually be really useful there. And now that we're on our own site, we think that we're going to be able to move ahead on that kind of thing pretty quickly. And then there were some goals internally. So, of course, we wanted to just reduce the maintenance burden overall. We wanted to signal some best practices to the ecosystem. So Shopify gives its developer community a fairly wide latitude. You can do a lot of things on this platform, and we don't really want to kind of close off possibilities for people. But at the same time, developers are looking for signals from us on what do you want from us? What are the things that are going to kind of set us up for success in the long term? And we wanted to be able to provide not instructions on exactly the way forward, but can we give you kind of some guidance on the path that is going to help you be more successful as a developer in the long run? One of our goals was to reach what we're calling developer adjacent audiences. One of the areas of growth for Shopify as a platform is a kind of network of basically partner agencies. These are mid to global size agencies that do some or all of their business developing on Shopify. They work with very large merchants, or they run very large and successful apps that are sold through the Shopify App Store. And with that type of entity comes all kinds of people who are kind of like developers, but they're not developers. So that could be something like the CTO of a mid-sized agency. That could also be the product manager who's working with a team of developers. These are people who interact with developers. They need to know about the capabilities of the platform, but they're not touching code themselves. And so we really wanted to be able to talk to those people in a way that meant that we were kind of talking the same language, but not necessarily in the same way. And then finally, this is related to kind of wanting to have our own developer resources focused on our developer community, is that, by being really laser focused on the developer experience, by moving all of this onto Shopify.dev, we felt that we would be able to kind of take control and really focus in on the things that we felt would grow that community healthily in the long run. Okay, I'll quickly run over the content audit I did. This was Shopify developer docs are all kept in our big GitHub repo. It's all marked down. So I audited all of our developer-facing documentation by indexing our own GitHub repo. I did a bunch of web scraping of things like our partner blog. So we have a blog where we actually provide quite a lot of instructional content. I did a bunch of API querying in GitHub to understand things like how often is this content being committed to and updated. And then a lot of CSV massage. In all, the final content audit was 2,868 rows, and there were a lot of VLOOKUP queries in there in order to allow us to correlate things like, okay, this page has gets this many commits per month, and it gets this many hits in Google Analytics. Therefore, we can, we were able to get kind of a sense of where are we investing time and effort right now, and where is the community actually looking for help. So this was a really useful exercise just to kind of level set and understand where we were at. The outcome of that is that we narrowed our focus just to these two parts of the docs. So, oh, yeah.
Jeff, did you want to go ahead?
Sorry, just on the last slide, there's a lot of terms that flew by, and I need some help understanding. What is a CSV massage?
So in this case, so the example I was thinking of when I wrote that was in Google Analytics. I downloaded kind of a bunch of historical data for all of the pages that we had in help.shopify.com. And so I think it was like, I looked back over maybe a quarter and downloaded that as just a giant comma separated values sheet that I could then upload into Google Spreadsheets. That then allowed me to do those VLOOKUP queries. So it means that we can take two different spreadsheets and then drag over a bunch of data from one to the other by using some really hacky kind of Excel Google spreadsheet methods. It was not pretty. This spreadsheet really ground my browser to a halt several times because there's just so much stuff in it, but it did provide a lot of useful intel. Does that answer your
That does
Kristen,
it.
is there
Thank you.
anything else I can clarify?
I'm good to go. Thanks, Graham.
Cool. Thanks for flagging that.
Graham, just so that I understand, you'd
Yep.
like people to raise their hands, and then I can interject, and they can ask their question.
I think that works.
That works. Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
I just don't want to interfere with your flow, but that sounds good to me.
No.
Okay, thanks.
I mean, the goal is to be helpful here. So let's I think let's stop and talk about anything that catches your eye.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah. So I mean, that's a big spreadsheet. Yeah, I know, like, I think there are probably some tech writers for whom, 2,800 lines or 2,800 documents, that's actually not that much for lots of development resources. But for us, this was the result of several years worth of growth. And so it was a bit daunting. But in the end, we decided to narrow our focus. And what we wanted to do was just talk about the API section of the docs and the theme section of the docs. We decided that that was kind of the place where we could have the most impact. So once we narrowed that down, we were dealing with about 1,800 pages total. And about 1,300 of those pages were auto-generated. So we have systems that will actually just build all of the HTML pages for the API documentation or the API references that we have in the docs. And so we didn't have to worry quite as much about those. The robots take care of those for the most part. But we did have about 500 pages worth of what I called human authored stuff, where someone had written this in the first place. Humans had intervened in the meantime and edited and made changes and additions. And so that was the stuff where we really needed to put the most care and attention and make sure that that stuff was moving or migrating in a way that was orderly and manageable. Okay, so this is where I want to talk about the actual user research, and I'll talk about the 3 rounds of user research that we did. And if you're not familiar with user experience research, I also was not. This was my first time going through any of this, so please stop me if there's anything that you want more detail on. But in order to kind of figure out, okay, we know that we have about 1,800 pages of stuff and we need to put it in some sort of order. How are we going to do that? And the answer is, well, we got to talk to the users and see what they say. So the way that we did this came in 3 rounds. So one was we called them up and we talked to them for about an hour each. Then we did what's called a moderated card sort, and I'll talk about the details of that. And then finally a tree test to kind of validate our assumptions after the first 2 things. So I'll go through each of these in turn, and then I'll talk about the actual information architecture that we wound up with on the site. And then I hope we can talk freely. So we did live one-on-one interviews with about 20 individual developers. We split them into 2 cohorts. So one group was people who already work on the Shopify platform. They're experienced with it. They know it well. And then another tranche of people who have never worked with Shopify before. We did this in scheduled 1-hour sessions. Usually the talks are about 45 minutes. And these were managed by an in-house user experience researcher. His name is Andrew Rajaram, and he's fantastic to work with. These were always scripted. So one of the things that Andrew did as a UXR researcher is he wrote the script that we were actually going to read for the entire conversation that we were having with them. And the reason it was important to do it with a script is because we wanted to get consistent feedback from them each time. And so we wanted to make sure that we were always asking the same questions, always in the same order, and kind of digging in only when we had when we needed additional context that was really crucial to have. These sessions always had one interviewer, one note taker, and optionally we had one observer. So anyone on the team who just wanted to kind of sit in and see what was happening, we always kept a 3rd spot open. Sometimes it didn't get filled, but it was important to have a note taker who's separate from the person doing the interview, because it is very difficult to follow the flow of the conversation and also take meaningful notes. We also kind of split our focus so that we covered a bunch of countries and a bunch of firm sizes. So we hit some developers who were like solo freelancers, and we also hit a bunch of like agency and larger firms as well, to make sure that we were getting kind of a representative sample of who's out there in the ecosystem, and are we actually kind of responding to all of their needs individually. Sorry, just getting some water. Okay, so these were the kind of results of the interviews. One is that Hello World is super important to this development community. They really wanted to start coding now, and they wanted to read later. And I think this is probably something that as technical writers we observe and are sometimes bemused by. But there's actually some really fascinating research on this. In the blog post that I wrote about this process, I linked to it about some pre-existing research about the two types of developers. And one is called the systematic type, and they like reading the docs and then starting to code. And there's the so-called opportunistic type, who likes to start writing code and only consults docs when they run into trouble. And that second type, the opportunistic type, seems to be in the majority. It's important to note that like neither style is correlated with like writing better code in the when it comes right down to it, but it does form two different and very distinct methods for interacting with docs. So we just wanted to be aware of that, and what we saw in these interviews was that most people wanted to get started as quickly as possible. So that's something that we I wouldn't say that there are kind of concrete actions that we took in the docs as we did this migration as a result of that, but it is definitely something that is on our mind as we're thinking about kind of resources that we're creating now and in the future. Another finding that I think is worth calling out is that the larger the firm, the more they cared about legal stuff, and the earlier they wanted to talk about it. So they cared about things like the API terms of service. They cared about our privacy policies, about data sharing that they would have to do back with Shopify, about the GDPR regulations and the CCPA in California. And the reason is because they're not doing this work on their own behalf most of the time. Usually they have clients who they have a fiduciary duty to like do this kind of due diligence. And this did have a really concrete effect on the migration that we did. Because I would say in the past, like we'd often thought of the API terms of service as being like, we'll add a link to it in the footer maybe. And we thought that people, they thought of it as legal boilerplate. And the reality is that this is really important, especially for a large proprietary platform like Shopify's, is that if our partners are getting into a long-term relationship with us, this is kind of a landlord-tenant relationship that they're establishing with us, and they really want to know, like, are they taking the leap with a platform that has their best interests in mind and that is looking out for them? So we actually moved up a lot of the kind of legal privacy and kind of trust information up in the site hierarchy when we moved it, because these are the kinds of things, especially with that growing agency partner model, where we really need to make sure that that stuff is like easy to find and very clearly laid out for people, because this is a relationship that we want to grow for the long term, and that means going into it with your eyes open. So we made sure to put all of that stuff higher in the hierarchy. And finally, what we found is that on a complex platform like Shopify's, the user persona model just doesn't scale. We tried as we went through these to say, okay, can we identify like 3 types of developers who work on this platform? And the answer was we couldn't really, because, as I said, we give developers a lot of latitude for what they want to do. And often they're doing things that we didn't predict that they would do in the first place. That's the power of the platform, is like we give people access to APIs and they run with it and they go and do things that we couldn't have predicted ourselves. And that has the effect of being like, okay, you can get kind of 1 or 2 steps down that path and say, okay, this is a type of developer who's doing something. But very quickly, the number of kind of combinations of activities that they can be doing just explodes exponentially. And suddenly, you don't really have a clear picture of like what a type of developer there is. So I would say what this drove is we tried to think less of what type of developer are we building for, and more about what are the things that they need to know about Shopify itself, and we have to trust them to navigate that on their own. Okay. The next thing that we did was we wanted to understand how people think about Shopify now, and like when they're given kind of a blank slate to take everything they know about the platform, how do they organize it, and like what is going through their head with that? So the card sort is something that we did with about 40 developers, and this was using a tool called Optimal Sort. And so what we did is we came up with 50 kind of topics. So these are development topics that people are working on in like things that they need to know. So authenticating their API requests, or submitting their public app to the App Store. And so we kind of listed out 50 of those. We presented those to them randomly in little cards, and this is all done through their web browser in the tool Optimal Sort. And then we get on a Google Hangout with them. And we ask them to sort that list of topics. We say, like, make 4 or 5 piles out of these things, and then label those piles. Tell us, when you group these things together, how do you put them together? Like, what do you think of as being a common sort of information? And then what do you call it at the end of that? This was actually, I would say, like the most useful thing that we did, and I would really encourage anyone who's doing this kind of work to definitely investigate this in future. And we're very lucky that what we got was some fairly consistent like mental models of this from these developers. And when we asked them to sort everything that they knew about, and also things that they didn't know about the platform, into these piles and then label the piles, often this is the pattern that they came up with, which is, 1, they wanted to know basic information about the platform, kind of top-down, bird's-eye view. What's, what are you about? Then they wanted to know legal and contractual frameworks, and I think, again, this is really important with a proprietary platform like Shopify's. Then they wanted to know API references. I think we're all familiar with those. That's kind of the bread and butter of developer documentation. They wanted tutorials, guides, how-tos. So everything that was kind of, I have a problem to solve, and can you walk me through the steps of solving that? That tended to always go together. And then finally, tooling. So things like our open source libraries, our SDKs. We offer some like developer tools like a CLI, that sort of thing. And those always tended to show up together. And that really heavily informed the actual information architecture that we went with in the end. And you'll see that this kind of structure is kind of very similar to what we have on the site today. So finally, the tree test. So what we did at this point is, having taken what we learned in the user interviews and then what we learned from the card sort, what we did is we put together kind of a hypothetical navigation menu. Like, if we were rebuilding the site and we came up with a kind of fanciful navigation menu that we wanted people to go through in order to find developer materials, what would we like? Could people actually find what they were looking for if they were navigating that menu? So this is, again, a tool in Optimal Sort. And in this case, this was unmoderated. So we didn't get on a call with them. We didn't walk them through this process. Basically, we just gave them a link and said, go here. And what it does is it presents you with this kind of fake navigational model for a website. And we say, OK, find the following 10 things. And then the system watches them as they navigate through the menu, and you watch them take blind alleys and like backtrack on things that they're finding. Sometimes they find the thing that they were looking for, and they have to click a button that says, this is what I was looking for. Sometimes they give up. Sometimes they click the the wrong thing. So you, at the end of it, you get kind of a very rough look at when people are looking for a particular piece of information. Does your navigational structure actually match what they were expecting? And so this is maybe a worthwhile activity, but this actually made me a bit of a skeptic of this method. And here's why, is it was useful in telling us that our labels were wrong. For instance, we had an entire section that we initially called platform, because we're a platform, and we felt like people should be used to that term, and that it would be clear to them, and it just wasn't. And that was really important to hear, because we'd been a little bit leery of that term as kind of a top-level navigational label. And this really convinced me that this was not the way to go, and that was valuable. It felt too branded, but it also felt too general. Is that it was the button that people clicked when they couldn't think of anything else to click, and so a lot of people got mired in this part of the navigation, when they could have found what they were looking for if we'd sent them elsewhere in the information architecture. So that was useful. However, I would say that tree testing is quite removed from reality, because at the end of when you're navigating that menu structure, you don't see a page with the information you were looking for at the end of it. It's just you kind of have to guess. If as the user, you click, I think this is where I was looking for that information. So it's not a great analog for how people actually search for this information in the real world. And then it's just really a great way to generate confirmation bias for yourself. When people find the thing that they were looking for in the navigational structure that you've designed, that feels great. And when they don't wind up finding it, you justify reasons why they didn't. And that's certainly I definitely engaged in that. And when they kind of went down a dead end and clicked the wrong thing that was definitely not what they were supposed to be finding, our reaction was kind of oh, well, we'll put a link to the right thing there. And so I'm a little skeptical of the utility of this. I think if you've done some really solid research about understanding your user's mental model, you don't necessarily need to do this step, because I think what it does is it tends to give a false sense of confidence, and I think it's a way to launder your opinions. Is we researched this, and I'm not sure that that's actually such a useful outcome for this sort of research. Which is not to say don't do it. I'm just saying this made me kind of skeptical of this as a method, and I just want to make sure that I'm upfront about that. Okay, so all of this process, this was a lot of trouble to go through. This took months to actually go through all of this user experience research. And this is the information architecture. Oh, hello.
Question. Question from Andrew.
Hey.
Hi, yeah. Yeah, you already spent a little bit of time on this tree test thing, but I'm fascinated by it. And you kind of just said something that blew my mind, so I wanted to kind of get you to re-say it and make sure I understand.
Sure.
Were you suggesting that your user research may be comprehensive enough to do without the tree test? And did you see any if you had made the conclusions right after the research without the tree test, would you have the same result, I guess, is what I'm wondering.
I mean, it's a good question, and the tree testing was so it was useful in the sense of making us test our own assumptions about what our ideas about this stuff, and it definitely what it did was it prompted those discussions internally. But the actual watching the little graph turn green and say the person found what they were looking for at the end of this search through the menu, it felt I just didn't trust the sense of security that it gave me. Is that felt like a it was very reassuring, and I'm not sure that reassurance is genuine, you know? Like I'm not sure that this would save you from making the wrong choice, and that probably what will save you from making the wrong choice is like having some difficult discussions within your group about the results of this test. So it's worth it. It's totally worth doing in that respect. I would just like approach the actual results of a tree test with skepticism and like look beyond the one result and find what it's trying to tell you like deeper within your soul. I don't know.
This is just fascinating. I'm sure I could talk to you about this a lot longer. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. And I will say, like, we still do a lot of tree testing, and like this is a very common kind of user experience research thing. I'm just saying that like as someone who was responsible for like the stewardship of the information architecture of this site, is that this prompted some soul searching on my part about like what I believed would be actually useful for our users, and how we were verifying that. So
Thanks.
okay. I think I'm running over time here, so sorry about that. But this is the top-level information architecture that we eventually came up with for the site. And if you go to Shopify.dev, you will see basically these menu items at the top. So it's concepts, docs, tutorials, and tools. And another way to think of that is context you need to know about Shopify, what Shopify gives you access to, how to perform common tasks on the platform, and everything that we give you to make it faster and easier to use. And you might notice that these map actually pretty closely to the results of what we saw from the card sort. And I think that's maybe this is just more confirmation bias at work, is that like I saw something that agreed with me in the card sort, and maybe that's why we went with this IA. It's kind of, I feel like once you open this this Pandora's box of like doubting the research materials, this is the kind of rabbit hole you fall down. But we felt that this was kind of an IA that made sense, and the one that we ultimately launched with. So very quickly, concepts gives you a high-level overview of the platform. This is where we want to articulate the technical capabilities. This is also where we want to talk about like shared policies, rules, and norms that extend across all the different developer products that we offer as a platform. And then if you're a very like technical user who's looking for a very specific resource within the docs, this is a place that we can route you deeper into the stack and get you exactly what you need. And the audience for this is kind of like developers, as well as those developer adjacent audiences I was talking about earlier. Then docs. This is, I think, the classic one that everyone thinks of is the comprehensive references that we provide for our APIs and our developer products. This is where we want to be the least opinionated and the most descriptive. So we want to, like, instead of saying this is how you should do it, we just want to say this is what the product does. When you pull this lever, this light will go on. This is organized by the API or product, and we try to add kind of a standard landing page that we could always have for every API and every developer product that we offer, is that there should be kind of always one page that you could link to. And so for instance, our admin API is our largest API. And basically everywhere you see the words admin API, you should be able to link to this page with confidence that you're telling people a good starting spot to learn everything there is to know about this resource. And the audience for this is like developers who are in the trenches. They need to know exactly what they can do with the APIs that are available to them. Then there's tutorials. So you remember I was talking very early on about how the kind of instructional content had been a little bit mixed up with reference content. And so this is where we pulled out everything that was to do with narrative, step-by-step how-to stuff. And we pulled it all out into tutorials, and everything lives there. This is where we're the most opinionated and prescriptive. So this is where we say, like, go here, do this, do it this way. We want to be much clearer with people about like what best practices we want to see from the community. And it's where we kind of, like every piece in tutorials should be kind of a standalone bit of instructional content that will help you get from whatever point you're at to whatever point you need to be at. So if that's point A to B, that's great. If it's point X to Y, that's great too. Again, this is contributing developers. Anyone who's in the trenches touching code should probably be browsing this. And then finally, tools. So any software that accelerates developers goes in here. So that includes libraries, frameworks that we have, the command line interfaces that we run. We have a couple browser plugins. There's like hundreds of example apps in GitHub. And often we're linking out to GitHub. So a lot of the tools that we offer are they evolve very quickly, such as like our libraries. There are like new versions being cut kind of like multiple times a week sometimes. So we don't necessarily put a lot of documentation in there. We keep it in GitHub where it's very close to the code base. And the people who need it, they tend to like follow that, that repository in GitHub itself. And we just kind of link out to it. So this is kind of a map to that larger, like wild space that is GitHub. And again, this is an audience of contributing developers, people who are in the trenches doing code. Finally, the feedback that we've had so far. So we launched on February 12th at Shopify.dev. And I would say like broadly positive and not that dramatic is how it's been. And I think that is like basically the best outcome that I could have hoped for. What I was really scared of was that it would be like a very exciting time and people would have a lot of strenuous opinions about our new developer documentations. And that's not really what happened. So, you know, this is like, this was a nice tweet that came out recently. This developer, in response to the coronavirus epidemic, referring to his chipmunk-sized attention span. I think we can all relate to that these days. So Shopify runs a Slack, which is specifically for partners in the developer community. And this was a message that came in through there. And it's, I think this is a really great example of how changing the frame changed the picture for some people, because he says, looks like a lot of work went into updating the code blocks and links to other resources. And I was involved at every stage of this process, and I can tell you that no work went into updating the code blocks and links to other resources. Like there was ongoing kind of maintenance work that the API docs team continues to do and like was doing throughout this process. But there was nothing that came up in the actual migration that changed any of these things substantially. But putting it on a new site, like reorganizing it, like it does make people kind of perceive it as being fresher than it actually is. And so there's, I don't know, there's a lesson to be learned there about the kind of the difference that a cosmetic facelift will have for some of this material. And then this is the boring part, is Default, which is a partner ecosystem podcast. This was the thing that they had to say about it in a segment that lasted about 30 seconds. This is maybe a bit of a boring comment, but from a user experience point of view, it's really nice. And I think this is like this is the kind of praise that I was looking for, is that people are just like, oh, seems good, I'll keep using it. Like what we've seen in the 6 weeks since then is there's been basically like no wild change in the behavior on the site. The traffic is steady, and like people seem to appreciate that we put some work into it, but overall they're continuing to do the kind of work that we want to see them do on the platform anyway. And that, I think, is the thing that I am happiest about with this, is that there was no drama. That's great. That's it. Okay, I've gone way too long. I would love to take your questions or like chat casually about this or whatever you want to do about it. I am GF Scott on like pretty much any platform you want to find me on, and I would love to talk more. That's it.
Thanks a lot, Graham. We did have a hand go up right near the end of the discussion. And so Jason has a question.
Yeah, thanks,
Yes.
Graham. I appreciate that the two approaches you took and the surprising correlation between the mental model and I think it was the optimal sort approach.
Mm-hmm.
So moving forward at Shopify, if someone is to create a document, are there sort of hedges or guardrails in terms of how they would identify their documents? I mean, these are the 4 high-level high-level groupings: concepts, docs, tutorials, and tools. So how do you guard against taking your lasagna and turning it back into spaghetti? And number 2 is, at the top of your, I guess, information architecture, is there a specific insight search engine you guys use to kind of identify like common searches, let's say, and then raise them to its highest level so that, you know, developers can find the document they're looking for, kind of like a Google search engine would do, to allow, instead of navigating, but rather just to quickly, like with my chipmunk attention span, I just want the answer right away and get that answer.
Excellent questions. I'll answer the second one first because it's really fast. So yeah, we have internal tracking that we run on all of the searches that get run if you type into the search bar on Shopify.dev. We do record like what are the most common things that people are searching for, and you know, since we're only 6 weeks into this change, we haven't made any material changes at this point, but it's something that we're kind of watching because I think we want to get a little more history before we start drawing inferences about that. And then the other thing that we did is implement Google Search Console on this so that we can see what Google searches people are coming to the site with. And so both of those we're kind of like watching to see, okay, how are people like getting to the site? What are they, like what search terms are they putting in that brings them there in the first place? And then what are they searching for when they're actually on Shopify.dev? We haven't made any changes yet. I expect that we will. On the second, or your first question about kind of, all right, we've got this my precious information architecture is in place and we worked really hard on it. It took a long time, and how are we going to preserve that? And the answer is there's a couple ways that we're hoping to do that. So one, of course, we do have like some meta documentation about how to write things for the site, like different parts of the site that people need to know, and we'll be doing some additional kind of outreach to the product teams. So like individual teams work on features and functionality of different developer products and APIs and things like that. And they're often responsible for thinking upfront about what kind of documentation do they need for those products, what changes do they need done over time. So we're Andrew and I are going to be working on kind of some of the flow stuff that we need to get in place to sort of protect this structure that we worked so hard on to get to this point. The other thing is that previously on the site, we had a lot of the navigation was controllable programmatically. So for instance, by editing some of the, like a couple settings in the top of these markdown files, you could actually change the navigation of the site. Like you could move items up and down by just like change, it had, it's all in markdown and it has YAML front matter at the top. So you could say wait and like increase that from 5 to 6 and it'll go higher in the navigation. And we actually stripped out all of that automation and made it so that all of our navigational elements are manually made. So like someone has to submit a pull request in GitHub, they have to get approved. Sorry, my beauty light went off. We have to like get approved, get a review in GitHub as part of the whole thing. We have to like have that conversation. Is that if people want to change the navigation of the site, that is like, they can't just do it now, is that that has to be approved and we have to like have the discussion, which is not to say that we won't make those changes. It's just that you can't make them unilaterally anymore, that it has to be a discussion, and that the technical writing team and me as the content strategist, like we at least are aware that that stuff is happening and get to actively contribute to that conversation. And so like that's actually like removing the ease with which people can change up the navigation was a really important part of kind of the changes that we made to the code base.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, it looks like we got Jeff. Jeff has got another question.
Great, thanks. One thing I'm kind of contending with, and I'm a little bit jealous that you were able to get so many developers to work with, is my partners are in direct competition with each other. So it's really hard for me to curate community-sourced information, whether it be, you know, like the old Microsoft MSDN had the MVP program, or even doing this kind of testing amongst various partners. I was just wondering if you guys had the same concerns and how you were able to mitigate that concern.
Oh, that's a really interesting question. Like, so to be honest, that was not a consideration that we had as we were working on these developer docs. I think the assumption is that like being so what like okay like a metaphor that I've often thought about through this process is I think there are some other services out there that are kind of like theme parks, right? Like you can go in the front gate, you will stand in this line, you will go on this ride, you will eat this pretzel, and it will be a great time. And Shopify is a little more like Yellowstone. Like we have put up some signs, and there are some paths that you can walk, but a lot of it is you as a partner kind of striking out into the unknown and seeing like what you can make happen. And that's I think that's a strength and a weakness of the platform, is that there's a tremendous capacity for people to solve problems that we as Shopify didn't know were problems in the first place. Like that's really great. But it also does mean that we don't do a lot of hand-holding, and there is risk for our partners. You know, like they do have the potential to hit it big and like make an app that goes into the Shopify App Store and gets installed by a lot of merchants. You know, we have 1 million merchants on the platform now. There's a big built-in audience for that stuff, and that's great. And some of them do like, you know, find that beautiful sunrise in Yellowstone. Some of them get eaten by bears as well. Like that's part of the reality of this platform, is that it's we are not going to tell you exactly what to do. And when you say that partners are in competition with one another, I think that's, like, broadly speaking, true in our case as well, is that, you know, many of them are doing things like providing like email marketing services. That's like a very common thing that people provide on the platform as a service, and like technically, yeah, they're in competition with one another. But our job as stewards of the developer docs are not necessarily to massage or put our thumb on the scale for the kind of business concerns that we have about that kind of thing. It's about saying, here's what you can do, and like show us what you can do as well, and get the rewards of doing that. And you know, the risks are part of that. I think you know, like risk is the handmaiden of possibility, and like what we're seeing with these docs is that we're not going to tell you how to succeed necessarily, but we're going to say, this is what you can do. These are the things that, like, the things that are open to you, and go to it. So I don't know. That's the only kind of thought that I ever had about this stuff, is that the business concerns are ones that we kind of have to defer to the partners on that.
Great answer, thanks.
Cool. Thanks, Jeff. So yeah, feel free, if anyone has any more questions, feel free to raise your hand at any time. Or if you prefer to type into the chat, you can always consider doing that. So yeah, I'm just taking a look at the time. I think Graham also mentioned, I think you might have, did you mention how folks can get a hold of you, Graham, if they have questions later on?
Yeah, absolutely. You can email me. I'm graham.scott@shopify.com. I'm on Twitter @gfscott. My DMs are open. I'm on LinkedIn @gfscott, gfscott.com. I don't know. If I try any combination of gfscott on something, you'll probably find me.
Nice. Yeah, I also included a link in the slides to the Medium post, and that's available on Meetup as well. So what I'll do now is I will. Oh, it looks like we got a question coming in from Cheryl.
Oh, thanks. So Graham, I was just wondering, you said, are you able to do any gather metrics about the use of the site now that you've made the changes? Like, I don't know, page hits or anything like that?
Yes. So we have so one of the things that was a real priority as part of this migration was being able to do like comparative tracking from before on the old site, and like being able to correlate, okay, this page was doing this amount of traffic when it was on help.shopify.com, and can we see, is it up or down or steady on the new site? And so we had to do some work in order to make sure that like our analytics software was tracking, like had some unique values that it could actually correlate these two things. And so again, we're very lucky to have like a data scientist who tapped in on the project and was able to get a lot of that stuff kind of sorted for us. We knew that we needed to do it, but it was one of those things that required developer resources to make it happen. So we've been able to kind of see like what is being successful on the site now, what are people looking for. We're tracking kind of usage broadly. I wouldn't say we've dug in a serious way yet, just because we don't have like very much historical data on the new site in order to make meaningful comparisons, but we will soon. I think within a couple months, then we can say, okay, quarter over quarter, like how are we doing? Another thing that we did as part of this, so if you go to either help.shopify.com or shopify.dev, at the bottom of every document, there's a little set of buttons that say, was this content helpful to you? And you can either click yes or no. And then there's also an option to leave a comment at that point if you have anything to say about it. And so we do watch that. I know that Andrew and Pat and the whole API docs team, they are watching those stats like a hawk, and they love seeing kind of what are people finding useful, where are the trouble spots, where people are getting confused and not sure about what they're seeing. And that's another one where, it did require a little special work to make sure that we were able to correlate from the old site to the new site. Are we still getting like equivalent metrics on that stuff? And I think we've mostly been successful in being able to say like this, in kind of saying over time from one site to another, are those metrics steady, declining, going up, going down? Again, it's one of those things where like on observing the new site, we have so little data at this point on that we're just reluctant, I think, to make any big decisions about what should go or what should stay, or like any big changes that we want to make at this point, just because we don't have a lot of history to go on. But it's on our mind.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for all the questions so far, guys. We do have a little bit more time, so feel free to raise your hand or type in the chat window if you'd like. And otherwise, what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the breakout rooms again. And so that'll give us a chance to hang out for a bit and chat. And then around 8 o'clock, that's when we're scheduled to end things. So I'll probably check in at 8, and we'll think about ending the movie. Sorry, ending the meetup at around 8 o'clock. And otherwise, please feel free to reach out on the meetup page and leave any feedback about tonight, about how the remote experience went. Any suggestions that you might have for the next one. Oh yeah, my pleasure. I'm happy that Zoom seems to have worked out. Yeah, please feel free to leave us some feedback on the meetup page with any kind of suggestions that you might have for the next one. And we do have a speaker more or less lined up for our next meetup, which is going to be April 28th, I believe. I don't want to announce just yet who that's going to be, but very shortly we're going to get the confirmation, and I'll go ahead and update the meetup for April, and we'll move ahead with this new format. Yeah, thanks for all your questions, and thanks for the comments in the chat that are coming in now. I'm seeing those popping up as we go. All right, I'm going to, so this time I'm going to let Zoom kind of randomly assign us into rooms, so you can maybe meet some new people, and end off the night. But yeah, thanks a lot, Graham. I feel like my, luckily for my chipmunk-sized attention span, this is the second time that I've been able to hear this variation on this talk, and I was able to dig in and get some more really good takeaways tonight that might have gone over my head the first time.
Well, thanks for the invitation. This was great to get to talk to everybody.
Yeah, I liked the format of people being able to put their hands up and ask questions as well as you went. So thanks for allowing for that, because I think that was a nice way of kind of digging in a bit deeper and getting a little bit more information on some things. All right, here I go, clicking the breakout room button. Oh, I see. It's like it's actually kept us all. It's kept our old assignments. So I was wrong about automatic. I think I'm just gonna open all the rooms, and I'll if I don't see you in the room, I'll see you guys in the next meetup. So hope everyone has a great rest of their evening, and yeah, stay healthy and safe and happy until the next meetup in April. So hope to see you all soon.